I came home early after successfully completing a patient's surgery and walked straight into chaos. My parents were in my living room screaming at each other while my daughter sat in the corner crying so hard she could barely breathe. Then I heard a crash upstairs. I ran to the bedroom and found my older sister tearing through drawers, throwing clothes on the floor and searching for jewelry and documents connected to my apartment. The moment she saw me, she froze. That's when I decided none of them would ever set foot in my home again. The first thing I did was get my daughter out, not the police, not screaming. 15 years in trauma medicine rewires you when everything is chaos. You triage, and the most fragile thing in that apartment was sitting in the corner of my living room, hyperventilating into her sleeves. I crossed the room without looking at either of my parents. My mother was mid-sentence, something sharp aimed at my father, and both of them went silent. When they saw me, I took my daughter's hand, pulled her up off the floor, and walked her through the kitchen door into the garage. She didn't speak until I'd buckled her into the passenger seat like she was 6 years old again. And then it all came out of her in pieces. Between gasps, they had let themselves in with the spare key, the one I'd given my parents for emergencies, flooded pipes, lost keys, the kind of emergencies that don't involve my jewelry. She'd been home alone after school doing homework at the counter when she heard the lock turn. My parents first, my older sister 20 minutes later, walking straight upstairs like she had a floor plan. They told my daughter I was in trouble, financial trouble, the kind I was apparently too proud to admit. They said the family needed to protect the apartment before I lost it, and that she needed to be a big girl and tell them where I kept my important papers, the deed, bank documents, anything official. Looking when she said she didn't know, because she is 14 and has never once needed to know where the deed to anything is. My mother called her ungrateful, said she was choosing to watch the family drown. That was when the crying started. That was the state I found her in 40 minutes later. And here is the part that broke something in me sitting in that garage. She kept apologizing to me for not knowing where the papers were, for not being able to stop them, for letting them in, even though she never let them in at all. They had a key. She is 14 years old, and she thought this was somehow her failure. I told her none of this was hers to carry. I handed her my phone, told her to lock the car doors behind me and call the building's front desk if anyone but me came through the garage door. Then I went back inside. My mother met me in the hallway, already talking, already on a fence. That's the thing about her. She has never once in my life entered a conversation she hadn't already won in her head. It came out in a flood. My brother-in-law's business was collapsing, not slowing down, not struggling, collapsing. Her word delivered like a diagnosis. The creditors were circling. There were letters, phone calls, a man who had come to their door, and the family. She kept saying the family like it was a single organism with one bank account. The family needed to act before everything was lost. The plan, as she explained it, was simple. I would sign the apartment over, just temporarily, just on paper. The apartment would sit somewhere the creditors couldn't reach while he restructured. And once the storm passed, everything would go back to normal. No one outside the family would ever know. She presented it the way you'd present a carpool schedule, like the only possible response was gratitude that she'd organized it all. And then she said the sentence I keep coming back to. You weren't supposed to be home until 7 o'clock. Not an apology, not an explanation, a scheduling complaint. They had planned this around my shift. They knew my daughter would be home alone after school, and they had counted on it when I didn't answer fast enough. The tears arrived right on schedule, the way they always do. My mother can cry the way other people clear their throat. A small biological function deployed at will. She wept about how she never imagined a child of hers would let family go under. How hard this was for her. How my father hadn't slept in weeks. My father, he was standing at the window with his back half turned, and he hadn't said a word. Since I walked in, and looking at him, I finally understood the screaming-eyed. Heard from the doorway what the two of them had been fighting about while my daughter sobbed in the corner. He hadn't wanted to do it this way. I'd have bet a year's salary on it. He'd wanted to invite me to dinner, sit me down, ask, like civilized people, and my mother had overruled him because my mother understood something he didn't want to say out loud. Asking gives me the chance to say no, showing up while I was in surgery with my daughter alone and the drawers already open. That wasn't impatience. That was strategy. He wouldn't look at me. In 36 years, I had never once seen my father unable to look at me. That's when I noticed the folder. It was sitting on my coffee table, square between the coasters, the way a realtor leaves paperwork. I hadn't put it there. I opened it while my mother was still mid-sentence, and the room got very quiet while I read. A property transfer document, professionally prepared, typeset, formatted, the kind of thing that comes out of an office, not a printer in somebody's den. My full legal name on the Grantaire line. The grantee was a company I'd never heard of, some bland reword name that meant nothing, and a small yellow sticky arrow, the kind banks use, pointing at the signature line. They hadn't come to talk. They hadn't even come to pressure
Me.
Not really. They had come to leave with my apartment, and the only stuff they hadn't worked out yet was me. My older sister came down the stairs while I was holding it. She had my jewelry box under one arm, my grandmother's pearls. In there, the watch I bought myself, the year I made attending, carrying it the way you carry something from your own closet. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pause. She said she'd been looking for the deed, because obviously I would hide it, and the jewelry was just collateral until I did the right thing. Her words, collateral. Here is what 15 years in trauma medicine actually teaches you. And it isn't tough, miss. It's sequencing. When everything is bleeding at once, you do not address the loudest thing. You address the deadliest thing quietly in order. Panic helps nobody, and rage is just panic without her posture. So I didn't yell. I didn't ask my sister who she thought she was. I didn't tell my mother what I thought of her tears. I put the folder down, took out the phone I keep in my work bag, and dialed the building's front desk, where they keep a security officer on staff. And while it rang, I told my family 3 things in the calmest voice I have ever used outside of an operating room. 1, the camera on the bookshelf, the small white one they had all walked past, the one that looks like a smart speaker had been recording since before I opened the front door, audio included. 2, the front desk was about to send security up, and anyone still inside my apartment when they arrived could explain the drawers to a man with a body. Camera. 3, they had 60 seconds. My sister set the jewelry box down on the table so carefully it didn't make a sound. My mother snatched the folder and held it against her chest like I might lunge for it. My father left last. He paused in the doorway, half turned, like there was a sentence he'd been building for 60 years. And then he walked out. Without saying it, I turned both locks behind them and stood in my own hallway, listening to the elevator take them
Down.
I didn't clean anything that
Night.
instinct said to put the bedroom back together, fold what they'd thrown, erase it. I did the opposite.
I
Photographed everything exactly as they'd left it. The drawers hanging open, my clothes across the floor, the closet with its guts pulled out, the nightstand they hadn't bothered to. Close, wide shots, close-ups, timestamps. On. It felt absurd, standing in my own bedroom, photographing my own underwear. Drawer like a crime scene tech. Then I remembered that it was a crime scene, and the absurd feeling went away. That's when I found the page. It was half under the armchair by the window where it must have slid when my sister was throwing things. A single sheet, page 3 of A. Property transfer document, but not the one from the coffee table. The formatting was slightly different, and the date in the footer was 11 days. Earlier, a draft, an earlier version, which meant the document downstairs wasn't something my brother-in-law had. Panicked until last week. It had been written, reviewed, and revised. They had gone through versions of Taking My Home. The way you go through versions of A. Wedding Toast. I sealed that page in A. Freezer bag, because I didn't know what else to do with it, and went to my office. The camera's back up to a cloud account, but I didn't trust that to be enough. I downloaded the afternoons footage, entry hall, and living room, both angles, onto my laptop, then onto 2 flash drives. One went into my work bag. The other went into the fireproof box where I keep the passports. Then I sat there and made myself watch it. My sister crossing my bedroom doorway with my jewelry box under her arm. My brother-in-law's absence. He hadn't even.
Call me.
He had sent my parents and my sister to do it the way you send movers. My mother standing over my daughter's shoulders. The 40 minutes I will never get out of my head. Then I called my attorney. He has been my attorney for a long time, and he is the only person on this earth who knew what I'd done 2 years ago because he's the one who drew up the papers. I told him everything. The key, the folder, the sticky arrow, the page under the chair. He listened the way good lawyers and good surgeons listen.
No?
Gasping, no interrupting, just the occasional question placed exactly where it needed to go. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Did you tell them about the trust? No, I said.
Good.
He said, don't. Not yet. Let them keep walking. He told me to write down everything while it was fresh. He told me our state only needs one party's consent to record a conversation. Remember that? He said, you're going to need it. He told me to change the locks at dawn. Then he said the thing I underlined in my head and have thought about every day since. They think the apartment is the prize. It isn't.
The
Paper trail is. Every step they take toward that signature line is a step they can't take back. Your job is to be quiet and let them walk. 2 years ago, my family taught me a lesson worth $30,000. I need to explain that because nothing about what came next makes sense. Without it, it started as these things always did. With my father's optimism and my mother's choreography, there was an investment, a friend of a friend, a ground floor opportunity, the word guaranteed, doing a lot of heavy lifting. My father needed $30,000 for 90 days. And it was my mother who called me. Because it was always my mother who called me. She didn't ask. She informed me of what the family needed in the tone of a woman reading a weather report.
I
Want to be honest about my part in it. I gave them the money, not because I believed in the investment. I'd heard the pitch for 4 minutes and could smell it, but because I had spent 36 years being trained at the path of least destruction was to pay. I'd paid all through residency when I had nothing. I'd paid for half my sister's wedding, while her fiancé leased a car that cost more than my first year's salary. Paying was simply the tax I owed for the crime of being the one who left and made
something.
the investment evaporated in 6 weeks. Nobody called to tell me
The
30,000 was never mentioned again.
not.
Repaid, not apologized for, just absorbed into family history like it had been a gift I was rude enough to remember. The one time I brought it up at a holiday table, my mother looked at me like I'd said something obscene, and my sister said quietly that it was sad. That money mattered to me more than family. I didn't bite. I didn't yell.
I
Drove to my attorney's office the following week. It took a month to do it properly. The apartment, the one I bought after residency with nothing but debt and double shifts, the one my daughter has written out every fever of her life in, went into an irrevocable
Trust.
Her trust, not in my name, with her as a beneficiary someday out of my name entirely managed by an independent professional trustee, a licensed fiduciary I have met exactly twice. The deed was recorded with the county like any other transfer sitting in the public records for anyone who ever bothered to look. I could not sign it away after that, even if I wanted to. That was the entire point. I had finally understood the arithmetic of my family. Anything that was mine was negotiable. So I made sure the only thing that mattered wasn't mine anymore. The cameras went up the same month quietly. The way the trust happened quietly. I told no one. Not my parents, not my sister, not even my daughter. She knew the apartment would be hers someday.
The
Way kids know things, vaguely, and without paperwork. I didn't do any of it because I imagined my family ransacking my bedroom on a Tuesday afternoon. I did. It because some part of me, the part that triages the part that counts, exits, had already done the math on the people I come from for 2 years. That paperwork just sat in the county records, waiting. And my family, who believed they knew everything about me, what I earned, what I owed, what I could be guilt, into never once thought to look.
the
Locksmith came at 7 the next morning. New deadbolt, new cylinder, 2 keys. One for my keychain, one for my
daughters.
I watched him drill out the old lock and felt something in my chest unclench by exactly 1 click.
The
Building manager came up while the locksmith was still working. I gave him a version of the truth. Family conflict. Unauthorized entry, the spare key. Situation was over. He deactivated my parents' guest fobs from the garage and lobby system while I stood there.
and
Then he did something I hadn't asked.
for
He flagged the unit in the building's file. No access, no keys, no information released to anyone but me. And the front desk would call up before letting any relative pass the lobby. He'd been managing buildings for a long
time.
I got the sense I was not the first person on his roster to need this. And that settled me and broke my heart. In equal measure, I kept my daughter home from school that day. We didn't talk about it for most of the morning. She watched television under a blanket, and I sat at the kitchen counter not answering the 11 calls that came in. Before noon, around lunch, she came and stood next to me. In that way, teenagers do when they need to say something and need to pretend they don't. Are we in trouble? She asked. No, I said.
They
Are. She nodded slowly, like she was filing it somewhere. Then Grandma said, "You were going to lose the apartment." Was that true? No, baby.
the
Apartment is not going anywhere. I promise you that in a way I can prove. She didn't ask what that meant. 14 is old enough to hear an adult choosing words carefully and decide not to pull the thread. She went back to her blanket, and I called her school. That part was clinical. The front office pulled up her file while I was on the phone, and I removed my parents from the authorized pickup list where they had sat since kindergarten. I asked the office manager to note that no relative other than me was to take her, sign her out, or be given any information effective. Immediately, the woman didn't ask a single crying question. She just read the new instructions back to me twice in the flat, careful voice of someone who has updated this exact file for other families before. That night, I stood in my daughter's doorway longer than I needed to. She sleeps like her whole generation. Phone an inch from her hand, 1 foot out of the blanket. Her breathing was slow and even, and I stood there in the dark until I had counted enough of it to go to bed. The campaign started on day 2, and it came in waves, each wave wearing a different costume. First wave, grief. My mother's. Voicemails opened with sighs, long ones, recorded sighs, and proceeded through how families forgive, how she didn't recognize me anymore, how my father's blood pressure was a number she recited, like a casualty report. Second wave, rage. You were always cold. You always thought you were better than this. Family, One voicemail was just my name. 3 times, each one colder than the last. And then the click. Third wave. Sweetness, which frightened me more than the rage ever could. Let's just get coffee. Just as girls. No papers, I promise. And then she laughed lightly as if the papers were a funny little misunderstanding we'd be laughing about. For years, my sister worked the text channel. You're really going to destroy this family over a misunderstanding. Then he has until the end of the month. Do you understand what happens to all of us? Then a photograph of my parents at their kitchen table looking stricken. Taken from the doorway, composed like an advertisement. I answered none of it. I screenshotted all of it into a folder my attorney had named with a lawyer's particular poetry correspondence. On day 6, my brother-in-law surfaced. In 15 years, this man had never once emailed me directly. Birthday wishes came through my sister. Holiday logistics came through my mother, but there it was in my inbox. Subject line, family. Matter, time sensitive, written in the tone of a regional manager disciplining a cashier. He was disappointed by the dramatics. The visit had been a misunderstanding blown wildly out of proportion. And frankly, the hysteria, his word, wasn't helping anyone. What the family needed was for everyone to act like adults. And acting like adults meant proceeding with the transfer before his creditors forced uglier options for everybody. He had attached a clean PDF of the document from my coffee table. He proposed a notary. He signed it best. I read it twice and called my attorney, and I could hear him smiling down the phone line. Do you understand what he just did? He said he put the demand in writing, attached the instrument, and timestamped it. He is building our exhibit binder for us in order with labels. What do I say back? 5 words, he said. Make them sought. And he drafted them with me like we were composing a sonnet. I need time to think. That was it. No anger, no questions, nothing he could forward around the family as proof of my instability. Just a small, tired, defeated sounding sentence. A door left open exactly 1 inch. He replied within the hour. Of course, take a few days. He told me I was finally doing the right thing for this family.
And the
Satisfaction coming off the message was almost a smell. The discipline of silence is brutal. Every cell in my body wanted to write back the truth in capital letters. Instead, I filed his email in the folder and went to work, where at least the bleeding I dealt with made sense. 10 days in, my mother ambushed me at the hospital. I had come off a brutal shift, a kid from a highway pile up for hours of surgery, the kind where your hands keep working long after your mind has gone somewhere quiet. It was almost 9 o'clock at night when I walked out into the parking structure, and she stepped out from beside a concrete pillar 2 spaces from my car. She must have been waiting a long time. That registered before anything else did. The image of my mother standing in a cold parking garage for hours rehearsing. Then she was on me, and the volume was extraordinary. Did I know what I was doing to this family? Did I know the creditors had sent a final notice? Did I want to watch my own father lose everything at his age? Was that what they raised? Was I really willing to ruin 4 lives over a piece of property? I didn't even need a nurse from the night shift slowed down half a row over watching. My mother saw her too, and the volume went up. The audience was the point. The audience had always been the point. Sign it before he gets sued, she said. And you can hate me afterward. Sign it or you'll ruin us all. I didn't argue. There is no arguing with this. The way there is no arguing with whether. I walked the last 2 spaces, got in, and locked the doors. And that's when she put her palms flat against my windshield, both hands. My 70-year-old mother pressed against the glass of my car in a parking garage, shouting that I was killing the family. I started the engine. I lowered the window exactly 2 in. He ruined himself, I said. And if you ever come near my daughter's school, you will find out what I am actually willing to do. Then I rolled the window up and backed out very slowly, giving her all the time in the world to step away, which he did. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2 like a student driver, because if I let them shake, they were going to shake for an hour. In the morning, I did what the new version of me does. I reported it to hospital security. The officer pulled the garage cameras while I sat in his office, found the footage, her arriving 90 minutes before I came out, the pillar, the windshield, and wrote it up as a formal incident. Harassment of an employee by A. Visitor, time-stamped, archived. He asked if I wanted her flagged at the entrances. I said yes. I sent the incident number to my attorney. He wrote back one line. That's another page. Keep collecting. My father asked to meet me 4 days later. He texted, which he never
Does.
Type punctuated the way men of his generation write when they have drafted. It's somewhere else first. He asked for coffee. He wrote, just me. I picked A. Diner 2 blocks from the hospital. Daylight hours, a corner booth visible from the street, and I hated that these were now the calculations I made for A. Cup of coffee with my own father. He was already there when I arrived, and he looked smaller, not thinner, smaller, like a man being slowly stepped down to a lower voltage. He stood when I came in an old courtesy, and we sat and while he turned his cup a quarter at A time and said nothing. Then he apologized, and I want to be precise about what he apologized for, because the precision is the whole story. He apologized for how it was done, for the key for my daughter being there, for the drawers. He said he had told my mother it was wrong to do it that way. The way as though there were a right way. To take my home and the family's only sin was sloppy execution. Then he asked me to find a way to help anyway. And then his voice dropped, and the actual truth finally came out of him fast and black, like a man reading his own diagnosis. Last year, he and my mother had personally guaranteed one of my brother-in-law's business loans, a big
One.
their signatures, their retirement, standing behind it. If my brother-in-law went down, he was not going down alone. The creditors would come straight up the chain and take everything my parents had. So there it was, the frantic mother, the staged tears, the parking
Garage.
They weren't fighting for their son-in-law. They were fighting for their own house. And the plan had been to feed mine to the fire burst. I asked him one
Question.
Did you know the document was already drafted before you walked into my apartment? Before you used the key? My father looked at his coffee.
He.
Turned the cup another quarter.
The.
Silence went on long enough to be the answer, and we both let it. I paid for the coffee. He let me, which told me something too. At the door, I stopped and told him, not unkindly, that the key didn't work anymore, that the building had been informed, and that the next time anyone in the family wanted to reach me, it could go through my attorney. He nodded at the table. He never did look up. I walked back to the hospital and stood outside the staff entrance for a minute, just breathing, before I went in to put my hands inside a stranger and fix what could be fixed. The next week, the picture got bigger, and it got uglier in a way I had not predicted. My attorney's paralegal had been pulling threads, and the threads led somewhere. The company on the Grante line of the transfer document, the bland 3-word name that meant nothing, was a limited liability company registered 5 weeks before my family let themselves into my apartment. 5 weeks. Its registered agent was my brother-in-law's accountant. Its filing address was a mailbox store between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. 5 weeks meant this. Predated the final notices he kept waving around. 5 weeks meant that while my daughter and I were having Sunday dinner at my parents' table, passing dishes, answering questions about her grades, the structure built to receive my home already existed. Someone at that table had known. Probably everyone at that table had known. Then the building Manager called me, and his voice had the careful tone of a man holding something with tongs. A woman had phoned the building office 2 days earlier claiming to be my assistant, asking what ownership documents the building kept on file for. My unit and whether copies could be released for refinance. I do not have an assistant. The building's office line records its calls. There's a disclosure at the start of everyone, and the woman had stayed on anyway, and he had already pulled the audio. He played me 10 seconds of it down the phone. It was my sister's voice, brighter than usual, performing confidence, but unmistakably my sister. I sat down on my own stairs and laughed briefly. The wrong kind of laugh. She was calling around town, hunting for a deed that has not existed in my name for 2 years, impersonating an employee of mine on a recorded line. My attorney stopped sounding like my friend that afternoon and started sounding like a man laying out surgical instruments. Here is where we are, he said. A conveyance document drafted in advance. A shell company formed in advance. Entry using a retained key. Attempted coercion of a minor. Harassment at your workplace. On camera. Impersonation on a recorded line to obtain property records. This stopped being a family argument a long time ago. What this is now is a paper conspiracy, and it is signing itself. He had already had a quiet conversation with a contact of his, a unit that handles financial and real estate fraud. They were interested, but interested becomes involved when the attempt matures, he said. A ransacked bedroom and an email make a file. A signing meeting makes a case, so we let it mature. I said, we let it mature, he said. They want to put a pen in your hand in front of a notary. I think you should let them book the room. We wrote my surrender on a Tuesday night. My attorney on speaker, the two of us, editing a 6-line email like it was a piece of legislation. Every word got weighed too warm, and my brother-in-law would smell it too cold, and he'd get cautious. The final draft said that the last few weeks had been overwhelming, that I'd had time to think about what actually mattered, and family mattered more than property, that I was willing to sit down and discuss signing, but it had to be done properly at a real office, notarized so no one could ever claim I'd been pressured. Friday worked his choice of venue. That last part was my attorney's favorite move, and he was nearly laughing as he dictated it.
Make.
The trap his idea, he said. Let him pick the room. A legitimate title office has to verify before it notarizes a conveyance. We're not springing anything on anybody we are walking him into. Standard procedure. The system itself is the trap. All you have to do is show up and be exactly as defeated as he needs you to be. I sent it at 9:14 that night. His reply landed at 9:25, 11 minutes.
I
Pictured him refreshing his inbox for 3 straight weeks, and I felt something I'm not proud of. The reply was magnanimous. He knew I'd come around. This was best for everyone, and someday I would see that. He named a title office downtown, 10 o'clock Friday morning, and told me to bring identification, and that small instruction, bring ID, told me everything about how completely he believed he had already won. He was standing at the finish line directing traffic. My attorney did his homework on the venue. Inside a day, a legitimate office, a licensed notary did everything by the book, which is perfect, he said, because the book is on our side. He briefed the trustee, the licensed fiduciary, who has quietly managed my daughter's trust for 2 years and whose existence my family has never suspected. And he made one more call to his contact, who confirmed that someone would be in the building Friday morning, not bursting through doors, just present the way furniture is present until presence was required.
the
Last arrangement was the only one that mattered to me. Friday after school, I drove my daughter out to a colleague's house in the suburbs, a surgeon I would trust with my life, who asked no questions and stocked the guest room with terrible snacks. The cover story was a long weekend sleepover with her. Kids, my daughter hugged me in the driveway a beat longer than usual. You're allowed to be 14 this weekend, I told her. I'll handle the rest. Whatever. The rest is, she said into my shoulder.
When?
I drove home, clear as throat in the dark with both hands on the wheel.
The
Night before the meeting, I finally put my bedroom back together. The photographs were long since taken, copied and filed in 3 places. There was no reason left to keep living inside. The evidence, so I folded everything they had thrown. I rehung the closet. I slid the drawers back onto their rails, one at a time, and I set the jewelry box back on the dresser, opened it, and checked pearls, the watch, and the little crooked clay ring my daughter made me in 2nd grade, which would have been worthless at any pawn shop, and was the only thing in that box I would have committed crimes to recover. Then I sat down on the floor of my own bedroom like a teenager and let myself remember buying this place. I was 2 years out of residency and underwater in debt. And everyone said, wait. I didn't wait. I worked doubles and picked up the call shifts nobody wanted.
and
The first night we had the keys there. Wasn't a stick of furniture in here.
so
My daughter and I, she was 6, 8. Pizza on this floor on a moving blanket. And she fell asleep mid-slice, and I sat in my empty apartment listening to my kid breathe and thinking, no one can ever take this. I was almost right.
I
Was one signature away from right, and it took my own family to show me where the gap was. My daughter called at 9 o'clock from my colleague's house, her voice low, hiding from the movie in the next room. Are you scared, she asked, about tomorrow? I thought about lying.
I'm
Her mother. Soothing lies are in the job description, but she had earned better than that this month. No, I said, I'm not scared. I've been ready. For 2 years. There was a pause on the line while she decided whether to pull that thread. 14 is old enough to hear a locked door inside a sentence. Okay. She said finally, love you when I slept. 7 hours that night, which tells you something. The body knows the difference between a bite and a procedure. Fights are uncertain. This was a procedure, and I had scrubbed in for it 2 years ago. The title office had a conference room with a long table and water glasses. Nobody touched, and my family was already seated when I walked in at 10. Sharp. They had arranged themselves like a board of directors. My brother-in-law at the head, the folder squared in front of him, a heavy silver pen lying across it like a gavel. My sister at his right hand, watching me come through the door with the patience of something that waits in tall grass. My mother with her arms crossed, wearing her good coat and her church posture. My father at the far and studying the wood grain. A title officer sat along the side with her laptop and her stamp log. A calm, gay-haired woman with reading glasses and the unhurried air of someone who has notarized 10,000 signatures and outlasted every kind of family this room has ever held. My brother-in-law did not bother with hello. He slid the document down the table the moment I sat, and the silver pen followed it, rolling to a stop against my water glass. Sign where the arrows are, he said. We'll have you out of here in 10 minutes. The yellow, sticky arrows still pointing at the Grand Terre line, still pointing at my name. I took my time. I set my handbag on the table in front of me. The recorder inside it had been running since the parking lot. My attorney's one party. Consent lecture playing in my head, and I read the document slowly, page by page, like a woman saying goodbye to something. Let them see defeat. Defeat was the costume. Then I asked in a small voice about the company on the grantee line. What is it? Who owns it? And because he had already won, because in his head this was over, and I was just paperwork now. My brother-in-law explained expansively. It's a holding structure, he said. The apartment sits inside it, clean, where the creditors can't characterize it as my asset while everything gets settled. Once it's all Resolved, it stays in the family. He actually used those words at a conference table in front of a licensed notary where the creditors can't characterize it. He described on the record the exact purpose my attorney had. Spent 3 weeks hoping he would describe. My mother nodded along. For the family, she said. My sister tapped the table. Next to the pen. The sooner you sign, the sooner this is over for everyone. I picked up the pen. I uncapped it. The whole table leaned in by a centimeter. All that hunger doing its best. Impression of patience. And out of the corner of my eye, I watched the title. Officer draw the document gently toward her side of the table. Fingers already moving on her keyboard. Just one moment. She said pleasantly to no one in particular. Before we execute, I verify. Title. Standard procedure. Of course, my brother-in-law said in the tone of a man. Approving the sunrise. I set the pen down and folded my hands. I am not a religious woman, but what I felt. Watching her type was close enough to prayer. The title officer's screen lit up her glasses. She read. She scrolled. She stopped scrolling. She looked at the
Document.
She looked at her screen. Then, she took off her reading glasses, which I have since decided is what that woman does instead of swearing. There's a problem with the Grantaire. She said, my brother-in-law's head came up. A problem. This document clears throat. Conveys the property from this lady. The title officer said, nodding at me, but this lady is not the owner of record. Hasn't been for some time.
The
County shows the property vested in an irrevocable trust recorded 26 months ago. The beneficiary is a minor.
the
Trustee of record is a licensed fiduciary. She has no authority to convey this property. Nobody at this table does. The silence that followed had a texture to it. I have stood in rooms where families are given the worst news of their lives, and I know that. Silence the half second where the mind refuses delivery. That's a mistake, my brother-in-law said. Run it again. She turned the screen around with the serenity of a woman who has never once been wrong about a title in her life. The recording history sat there in plain municipal type. The transfer 26 months ago, the trust's name, which carries my daughter's initials, if you know what you're looking at. He knew what he was looking at. I watched him find the date. And I watched the date hit him. That before his accountant filed the shell company, before the first draft, before any of this, my home had already been out of his reach for 2 years. She moved it, he said, and his voice was changing. Register. She hid it. She transferred it to Dodge. And then his mouth stopped working because even he could hear where that sentence was going and exactly who it indicted. That's when the door opened. My attorney came in first, and the sight of him rearranged every face at that table because they knew him. Decades of holidays, and he was not wearing his holiday face. Behind him came a man my family had never seen. Gray suit, courteous, unhurried. The trustee who has guarded my daughters home for 2 years from a quiet office across town, and behind him came a third man who did not sit down and did not need to. My attorney set a banker's box on the table and dealt it out like a hand of cards. Security footage stills. Time-stamped. My sister and my bedroom. Doorway with the jewelry box under her arm. The draft page from under the armchair dated 11 days before the version on the table sealed in its bag. The email family matter time sensitive. With the instrument attached.
the
Hospital security report and the garage. Stills. My mother's palms flat on my windshield. The building office. Recording. My sister's bright, unmistakable voice asking what ownership documents could be released. And last, I reached into my handbag and set the recorder beside the silver pen still, running with the past 10 minutes inside. The third man spoke for the first time. He named his unit. He told my brother-in-law that the attempted conveyance of property held in trust for a minor, the shell entity formed to receive it, and the statements made in this room were now part of an active file. and that he should make himself available. Then he looked mildly at my mother, who had been inching the folder off the table and into her bag, and observed that anything further would also become part of the file. My mother's hands went still on the table, like two birds shot out of the air. My sister broke first. She came up out of her chair and around the table at me, crying before she even arrived. Not sorry. Crying, drowning, crying, and grabbed for my arm. Please, you can fix this. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. We're sisters, please. My attorney stepped between us without hurrying.
Do.
Not touch my client, he said, and something in his voice put her back in her seat. My father never looked up from the table. My brother-in-law had gone. The color of the wall behind him, staring at the silver pen where it lay, beside the recorder, an inch from A. Signature line that was never mine to sign. I stood up. I had exactly one sentence left in me. I had been carrying it for 3 weeks, and I set it down gently in the middle of the table where the folder used to be. You spent 5 weeks planning to take her home. I said it was hers the entire time. I walked out of that conference room and nobody stopped me. Past the lobby where 2 more people in unremarkable suits sat with coffee. They were not drinking out into a cold, bright, ordinary Friday where the rest of the city was just having lunch. I sat in my car for a moment, hands at 10 and 2, and waited for the shaking. It didn't come. The body knows the difference between a bite and a procedure. And the procedure was done. I texted my colleague 2 words coming north and drove out of the city with the radio off. 40 minutes of quiet. The first real quiet in a month. My daughter was on the porch steps before I had fully stopped the car, backpack already on, like she'd been sitting there with it for a while. She searched my face through the windshield the way I search monitors. Well, she said when I got out, it's done, I said. Nobody is taking your home. She blinked. My home. So I told her, standing in a driveway in the suburbs with somebody's sprinkler ticking 2 lawns over. I told my 14-year-old that the apartment had not been mine for 2 years, that it was hers, really hers, paper and law and a quiet man in a gray suit guarding it, and that the people who made her cry in a corner had spent 5 weeks scheming to steal something from a child and had walked in their good coats directly into the public records that proved it.
She
Didn't whoop, she didn't cry. She did something better. She exhaled long and slow all the way down to the bottom. A breath I think she had been holding since a Tuesday afternoon in our living
room.
At night home, both locks turned. I stood in her doorway longer than I needed to. Phone an inch from her hand. 1 foot out of the blanket. Her. Breathing slow and even and unafraid. The only asset I have ever truly owned.